They called her the geologist because she studied the rock, a simple designation for a complex function they could not begin to comprehend. They saw a civilian analyst, a woman seemingly soft and out of place in their world of hardened steel and controlled fire, a quiet anomaly in the loud, masculine ecosystem of a forward operating base. They learned, in the crucible of a single, desperate night, that she was a weapon forged in silence and unimaginable pressure. By the time they understood the true nature of the ground beneath their feet, their established world had already been brought down upon them. They learned that the most dangerous force in the Zagramar Mountains was not the faceless enemy hiding in its shadowed valleys, but the quiet woman who could command the stone itself. Forward, operating base terminus was a scar of iron and concrete gouged into the flank of a hostile world. It existed at an altitude where the air grew thin and sharp, a constant reminder of the body's fragility. The mountains themselves were jagged blades of Precambrian gneiss and schist, ancient and utterly indifferent to the transient human conflict playing out across their surfaces. A wind that never truly slept scoured the rock, carrying with it a fine grit that worked its way into everything: machinery, food, lungs. It was a sound like a blade being sharpened on a whetstone, a perpetual anthem of abrasion. Within the command and control bunker, a cramped, subterranean space carved from the mountain's heart, the atmosphere was a pressurized blend of recycled air, the bitter tang of stale coffee, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the humming server racks that lined the walls. This was the nerve center, a place of forced calm where flickering screens displayed the vital signs of a precarious existence. Dr. Eris Thorne sat before a specialized terminal, a quiet island in the room's low tide of activity. Her station was set apart from the main tactical displays, its 3 monitors showing not enemy positions or friendly troop movements, but flowing, intricate lines of data that resembled the vital signs of a dying patient. They were seismographic readouts, gravimetric distortions, and subterranean acoustic profiles. To the Marines who occasionally glanced her way, it was meaningless noise, the academic doodling of the civilian specialist they had been ordered to accommodate. Thorne herself seemed to merge with the background. She wore simple gray fatigues, devoid of rank or insignia, her hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. She had not spoken a word in 3 hours. Her stillness was absolute, a stark contrast to the restless energy that permeated the bunker. Her focus was a physical thing, a lens through which the world was filtered and refined into pure information. She was not looking at the lines on the screen. She was reading a language. The subtle flutter in the P-wave velocity from the deep Earth sensors was a whisper of increasing tectonic stress. The micro-tremors, too faint for any standard equipment to register as significant, were forming a coherent pattern, a dialogue between immense geological forces. Her fingers moved with slow, deliberate precision across the keyboard, not typing words, but executing complex queries, cross-referencing the incoming data with a multi-terabyte geological survey of the entire Zagramar range. The rock was speaking to her, telling a story of pressure, of hidden voids, of imminent fracture. She felt the tension not just in the data, but in the very air of the bunker, in the low-frequency hum that vibrated through the concrete floor and into the soles of her boots. It was a resonance, a harmony between the anxiety of the men around her and the groaning of the mountain that held them in its fist. Her perception was a multi-layered construct. She saw the room, the men, the glowing screens, but beneath it all, she perceived the immense, slow violence of the earth, a force that dwarfed their fleeting concerns of strategy and survival. The doors to the command center hissed open, cleaving the tense quiet. Major Corbin Vance entered not as a man walking into a room, but as a force of nature designed to occupy all available space. He was a large man, his uniform stretched taut across a barrel chest and broad shoulders, every line of him screaming authority and impatience. His voice, when it came, was a blunt instrument, designed to hammer compliance into his subordinates. "Situation report, now!" he boomed, his gaze sweeping the room, not to gather information, but to assert dominance. The duty officer, a young lieutenant named Harris, snapped to attention, his voice tight as he rattled off the standard litany of patrol statuses and sensor readings. Vance listened with a kind of aggressive boredom, his jaw tight, his presence a disruptive pressure wave that threw the room's delicate equilibrium into chaos. His survey of the room eventually snagged on the still form of Eris Thorne. He stopped, his eyes narrowing. He saw a civilian, an academic, a soft variable in his hard-edged military equation. He saw a lack of uniform, a lack of deference, a lack of what he considered to be productive activity. She was an anomaly, and Major Vance did not tolerate anomalies. He strode over to her station, the heavy tread of his boots a percussive threat on the concrete floor. He loomed over her, deliberately casting his shadow across her screens, a petty act of territorial marking. She did not look up. Her focus remained entirely on the flowing lines of data, her posture unchanged. This utter lack of reaction, this perceived slight, was a spark on the dry tinder of his ego. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. The question was not a request for information. It was an accusation. "I have men risking their lives out there, and you're in here watching squiggly lines. What possible value are you adding to this operation, Doctor?" The title was a sneer, a way of highlighting her otherness, her civilian status. Thorne completed the data query she was running, her fingers moving with an unhurried grace that seemed to mock his manufactured urgency. Only when the process was complete did she finally turn her head, her gaze lifting to meet his. Her eyes were a calm, neutral gray, and as they focused on him, he had the unsettling feeling of being not seen, but scanned. She was not registering his rank or his anger. She was analyzing his biometrics. She noted the faint tremor in his right hand, the elevated carotid pulse visible in his thick neck, the slight sheen of perspiration on his brow despite the bunker's controlled climate. She cataloged these as indicators of high stress and low emotional control. "This," she said, her voice quiet and even, devoid of any inflection, "is a real-time analysis of lithospheric stress and karst topography resonance. It provides a predictive model for subterranean structural integrity." Vance stared at her, his face a mask of contemptuous disbelief. He did not understand a single word she had said, and that fact enraged him. He interpreted her technical precision as deliberate obfuscation, an academic's trick to assert intellectual superiority. He felt the eyes of the room on them, and his need to re-establish his dominance became overwhelming. He leaned closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, menacing tone meant for her and the few nearby. "I don't have time for this academic garbage," he hissed. "This is a war zone, not a university lounge. Every person on this base has a function directly related to combat effectiveness. You're a drain, a fat cow feeding on military resources while my Marines are out there, lean and hungry." He jabbed a thick finger toward her screen, smudging the glass. "You are dead weight, a soft asset we are being forced to carry. From now on, you will justify your existence here every single hour, on the hour, with a written report submitted to me personally. Is that clear? The insult was designed to humiliate, to reduce her to a caricature of the useless, overfed civilian. It was a crude but effective tool he had used before to break down those who challenged his authority, however passively. He expected a reaction: anger, fear, tears, a flustered defense. He expected to see her crumble. He got nothing. Thorne's expression did not change. Her gaze remained analytical, her posture relaxed. She processed his words as she had processed the seismic data. Another input, another variable in a complex system. The emotional content was irrelevant noise. The core data was his tactical blindness. She looked from his angry, florid face to the tactical map displayed on the main screen behind him. She traced the projected patrol routes he had personally approved that morning. Her mind overlaid them onto the three-dimensional geological map she had spent weeks building in her head. The intersection was terrifyingly precise. She turned her gaze back to him. Her response, when it came, was not a defense. It was a simple, chilling statement of fact, delivered with the flat finality of a terminal diagnosis. The lithospheric stress in this sector is increasing at a rate of 0.8 kilopascals per hour, Major. A significant concentration of this pressure is located directly beneath the Zagramar Ridge. Your primary patrol routes, Bravo and Charlie, are on a confirmed unstable fault line. I would advise you to recall them immediately. She had not raised her voice. She had not challenged his rank. She had simply presented him with an inconvenient reality, a truth that existed outside his sphere of influence. For a man like Vance, a man whose entire worldview was built on the foundation of his own authority, this was the ultimate act of insubordination. He saw her clinical warning not as an attempt to save his men, but as a direct, personal attack. His face purpled with rage. "Are you giving me tactical advice, Doctor?" he snarled, his voice rising to a parade ground bellow that silenced the entire room. "Are you, a civilian rock watcher, questioning my operational command? You have your orders. I want that report on my desk in 58 minutes. He straightened up, his chest puffed out, a caricature of military power. He had won. He had asserted his dominance and put the civilian back in her box. He turned on his heel and stalked toward the central command dais, the matter concluded in his mind. Thorne watched him go. She felt no anger, no humiliation. She felt a cold, rising dread. She turned back to her screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard, running a new series of simulations. The data flowed, the lines converging toward a singular, catastrophic probability. The mountain was groaning, the Major was deaf, and the men of patrols Bravo and Charlie were walking on a ceiling of fractured stone, utterly oblivious to the abyss yawning beneath them. The clock was ticking, measured not in minutes, but in the slow, inexorable buildup of kilopascals. She began to work, her focus absolute, her mind a cold engine of calculation. She was no longer just a geologist. She was a Cassandra, watching a tragedy unfold in the language of numbers and stone. She had to find a way to make them listen before the mountain delivered its own final report. For the next 2 hours, the bunker settled into a state of heightened, anxious stasis. Major Vance presided over the room from his central console, a petty tyrant radiating waves of irritation. He demanded constant updates, micromanaged radio traffic, and barked corrections for imagined slights. It was the performance of command, a loud and hollow display that did little to mask the underlying tension. Thorn, for her part, remained a statue of focused intensity. She ignored the Major's existence. She did not file his demanded report. Instead, she dove deeper into the data, her mind a whirlwind of frantic, silent activity. She began to integrate new data streams, hacking into the base's own infrastructure feeds. She pulled power consumption metrics from the perimeter defense grid, cross-referencing them with atmospheric pressure and temperature logs from the meteorological station. She was hunting for correlations, for whispers of a larger pattern that lay hidden beneath the surface of the obvious. The enemy, designated only as the Zagramar militia, had been quiet for weeks, a stillness that the command staff had interpreted as a sign of weakness. Thorn saw it differently. In nature, silence often preceded a violent eruption. She suspected the enemy's tactics were far more sophisticated than the Major's simplistic worldview allowed. They had lived in these mountains for generations. They understood the rock, the wind, the silence. They would use the environment itself as a weapon. Her search yielded a terrifying anomaly. There were minute, rhythmic power fluctuations in the deep Earth sensor network, the very sensors she was using. They were too regular to be natural seismic events, too low-powered to be a conventional jamming attempt. It was a digital ghost in the machine, a subtle interference that most systems would have dismissed as background noise. But Thorn's custom-built diagnostic software flagged it immediately. She isolated the signal, stripping away layers of encryption and protocol noise. What she found made the air freeze in her lungs. It was a parasitic signal, a data leech of extraordinary elegance and sophistication. It wasn't jamming their sensors, it was reading them. The enemy was using their own high-tech surveillance network against them, watching the mountain through their eyes. Worse, the parasitic signal had a carrier wave, a secondary function. It was broadcasting, not just receiving. It sent out ultra-low frequency pulses, tuned to a specific resonant bandwidth. It was a form of communication, but not for human ears. It was acoustic signaling, sent through the bedrock itself. The enemy was talking through the stone. This was how they coordinated their movements without breaking radio silence. This was how they knew where to strike, where to hide. They had turned the entire mountain range into a massive, secure communications network. And the rhythmic pulses, they weren't just communication. Thorn ran a spectral analysis. The frequency was dangerously close to the natural resonant frequency of the karst limestone formations that riddled the sublevels of the range. They weren't just talking through the rock. They were tuning it. Now, the world broke. It happened not with a single explosion, but with a symphony of systemic failure. The first note was a sudden, violent spike of data across all of Thorn's screens, a scream of pure digital noise. The parasitic signal shed its stealthy disguise and became a full-spectrum denial-of-service attack. Every network system on the base flatlined simultaneously. The main tactical displays went black, replaced by a cascade of error messages in a language no one understood. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then switched to the harsh, blood-red glow of emergency power. The clean hum of the server racks died, replaced by a rising chorus of high-pitched hardware failure alarms. The bunker was suddenly blind, deaf, and drowning in the sound of its own technological death. Before anyone could even process the digital decapitation, the physical assault began. A series of deep, concussive booms echoed from outside, not the sharp crack of mortars, but the gut-thumping whoomp of heavy ordnance striking the base's outer defenses. The concrete floor shuddered violently. Dust and small particles of rock rained down from the ceiling. Shouts of alarm and confusion erupted around the room. Major Vance was on his feet, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Report!" he bellowed into the void, his voice cracking. "Get me comms! Get me the defense grid online! What the hell is happening?" His orders were useless. There were no comms. The defense grid was a ghost. His authority, built on the scaffolding of technology and protocol, had evaporated in an instant. He was just a man shouting in a dark, shaking room. His textbook response was immediate and catastrophic. "Send out the QRF. All squads, full battle rattle, defensive positions, Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Now, move!" He was trying to solve a 21st century network-centric attack with 20th century infantry tactics. He was sending his men out into the chaos, blind and without coordination, to face an enemy who knew exactly where they were. Worse yet was the news that finally trickled in, delivered by a breathless runner from the surface. Patrols Bravo and Charlie, the ones on the Zagramar Ridge, were gone. Their last transmission, before the blackout, had been a frantic shout about the ground giving way. The enemy hadn't attacked them. The mountain had. The enemy's acoustic pulses, the careful tuning of the rock, had reached its crescendo. They had triggered a localized precision rock slide, using the fault line Thorne had identified as a weapon. They had buried 2 squads of Marines without firing a single shot. Vance's face went slack, the blustering rage draining away to be replaced by the pallor of abject failure. The reality of his mistake, of his arrogant dismissal of Thorne's warning, crashed down on him. He had not just been wrong, he had been lethally wrong. His men were dead because he had refused to listen. In the red-lit chaos of the dying command center, surrounded by the cacophony of alarms and the tremors of ongoing impacts, Major Corbin Vance fell silent. He stared at the blank screens, his command broken, his authority a pile of ash. The orthodox methods had failed. The protocols were useless. The arrogant authority was paralyzed, and the enemy was at the gates. The crisis was absolute. In the heart of the paralysis, a single point of calm remained. Eris Thorne had not moved from her station. While others panicked, she observed. The red emergency lighting cast long, dancing shadows, turning the familiar space into a hellish landscape. The air was thick with the smell of burnt electronics and fear. The ongoing vibrations from the surface impacts were no longer random. They had a rhythm, a purpose. They were shepherding tools designed to force the base's defenders into pre-selected kill zones. Her mind, insulated from the rising panic, processed it all. The failure of the network was not a problem. It was an opportunity. The enemy believed them to be blind. They did not know that one person in the bunker did not need their eyes to see. She stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and it cut through the chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. Every eye in the room, including Major Vance's empty gaze, turned to her. In the crimson gloom, she seemed to draw what little light there was to herself. She did not seize command. It was irrelevant. She was the only one left who knew what to do. Authority, in that moment, became a function not of rank, but of clarity. She walked past the frozen major, her steps sure and steady on the trembling floor, and stopped at the master engineering console at the front of the room. It was an older, hardwired system, largely ignored in favor of the more advanced tactical network. It was, however, still functional. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it possessed a quality of absolute precision that sliced through the noise. "Sergeant Diaz," Sergeant Marcus Diaz, a career signals intelligence specialist, was crouched by a dead server rack, a useless diagnostic tool in his hand. He looked up, his face grimy and etched with stress. He had been in the room when Vance had berated her. He had heard her warning. He had seen the Major's fatal arrogance. Now he saw the catastrophic result. "Ma'am," he responded, his voice hoarse. "The main power conduits are fried," Thorne stated, her fingers already flying across the engineering keyboard, bringing up low-level system schematics. "But the auxiliary generators for the Deep Earth sounding project are on a shielded, independent circuit. I need you to manually reroute all available power from that circuit to the primary emitters of the seismic array. Bypass the central processors entirely. I want a direct, raw feed to this terminal." Her order was bizarre. It was counterintuitive. In the middle of a ground assault, she was asking him to power up geological survey equipment. But it was a clear, actionable command in a room that had descended into headless chaos. From behind them, Vance finally stirred, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "What in God's name are you doing, woman?" he rasped, his voice a pathetic echo of its former power. "Get away from that console. That is a direct violation of—" Thorne did not even spare him a glance. Her entire being was focused on the task. "Sergeant," she repeated, her tone unchanged. "Now!" Diaz looked from Thorne's unwavering profile to the broken figure of his commanding officer. He saw the past and the future. He saw a choice between a failed authority based on rank and a new authority based on observable competence. His years of training, his ingrained obedience to the chain of command, screamed at him to obey the Major. But his logic, his very instinct for survival, told him that the Major was no longer in command of anything, least of all the situation. He made his choice. "Yes, ma'am," Diaz said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. He scrambled to his feet and disappeared into the maintenance crawlspace behind the server racks, a set of heavy-duty insulated cable cutters in his hand. The sound of his work, the sharp snap of severed cables, and the clank of rerouted connections was the sound of a new hierarchy being forged in the heat of crisis. A few other technicians, seeing Diaz's lead, moved to help him, their movements quick and purposeful. They had a mission again. They had an objective. Authority had not been seized by Thorne. It had flowed to her as water flows to the lowest point, a natural consequence of the vacuum created by Vance's incompetence. The turn had been made. Within 90 seconds, a low hum began to emanate from the walls of the bunker, a vibration that felt deeper and more powerful than the explosions from the surface. On Thorne's engineering console, the screen flickered to life, not with neat graphics, but with a torrent of raw, cascading data. It was the unfiltered voice of the mountain, a roaring wave of seismic information. To anyone else, it would have been an incomprehensible wall of numbers. To Thorne, it was a perfect, high-resolution map of the battlefield. She saw everything. The enemy's acoustic signaling was no longer a subtle whisper. It was a shout, and with the full power of the seismic emitters, she could not only hear it, she could pinpoint the origin of every pulse. They were using a series of interconnected cavern systems, a massive hidden network that honeycombed the entire mountain. The main staging area, the heart of their operation, was a vast limestone cavern directly beneath the northern ridge, a geological feature not present on any standard survey map. It was a natural fortress, impervious to aerial bombardment or direct assault. She could also see the impacts from the enemy's ordnance. They weren't random. They were precisely targeted, striking specific points on the surface. She cross-referenced the impact locations with her resonance models. They weren't trying to destroy the bunker. They were using the explosions as percussive instruments, sending focused seismic waves into the bedrock. It was a massive, geological-scale version of the acoustic pulses, designed to weaken the rock formations around the base, to systematically break the foundation it was built upon. They were not laying siege to the base. They were trying to bury it. "They're using the mountain as a resonance chamber," she murmured, more to herself than to the small group of technicians now gathered around her, watching in awed silence. "The explosions are tuned. They're trying to find the resonant frequency of the granite batholith this entire facility is anchored to." It was a plan of breathtaking audacity and sophistication, a checkmate conceived not in terms of tactics, but of physics. But their plan had a flaw. By screaming into the mountain with their explosions, they had given her the precise data she needed. Their weapon was also their undoing. In the torrent of seismic data, amidst the noise of their own attack, she saw the echo, the reflection of the sound waves as they passed through the different rock strata. She filtered out the enemy's interference, isolating the natural harmonics of the geology itself. And there, deep within the limestone formation of the northern ridge, she found it, a keystone, a single massive formation of travertine, a crystalline form of limestone that acted as the structural linchpin for the entire cavern system the enemy occupied. It was a geological anomaly, a point of immense concentrated stress. According to her models, it was already under incredible strain from the tectonic pressure she had identified hours earlier. The enemy's own vibrations were weakening it further, but they didn't know it was there. They were deaf to the mountain's most intimate secrets. Thorne knew she didn't need a bunker-busting bomb. She didn't need an army. She needed a single, pure musical note. A precisely calculated frequency that would induce a state of sympathetic resonance in the travertine keystone. A vibration that would match the stone's natural harmonic and amplify it exponentially until its own internal energy tore it apart. She would not blow the mountain up. She would politely ask it to shrug. Her fingers danced across the console, no longer interpreting data, but composing. She was writing a piece of music, with the deep earth emitters as her orchestra and 1 billion tons of rock as her instrument. She isolated the target frequency, a low subsonic pulse at 12.38 Hertz. She calculated the required amplitude, the duration, the exact waveform needed to transfer the maximum amount of kinetic energy. It was the most complex and delicate ballistic calculation of her life, but the projectile was a wave of sound, and the target was the heart of a mountain. "Diaz," she said, her voice calm, "divert all remaining power to the primary emitter, sub-level 7, full amplitude. I'm uploading the frequency sequence now." "Ma'am," Diaz replied, his voice tight with anticipation. "What's it gonna do?" Thorne paused for a fraction of a second, her finger hovering over the activation key. She looked at the faces around her, illuminated in the glow of the screen, tense, hopeful, trusting. She even glanced back at Major Vance, who was now just a slumped, empty uniform in a chair, a ghost at the feast of his own making. "The science of geology," she said softly, "is the study of pressure and time. I am about to apply a significant amount of the former to accelerate the latter." She pressed the key. Perfect. There was no sound. Not at first. Instead, there was a feeling, a deep, pervasive hum that seemed to originate not from the walls, but from inside the bones of every person in the room. It was a vibration so low it was felt more than heard, a resonant thrum that vibrated up through the floor, through their skeletons, making their teeth ache. It grew in intensity for precisely 12 seconds, a silent, rising crescendo of pure physical force. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a profound, ringing emptiness that was more deafening than the previous chaos. The distant crump of enemy ordnance ceased. The rhythmic shuddering of the ground vanished. The very air in the bunker seemed to hold its breath. For 3 long, agonizing seconds, nothing happened. A flicker of doubt crossed Diaz's face. Had it failed? Then the mountain answered. It was not a tremor from the surface. It was a deep, violent, grinding lurch from the bedrock far below them. The bunker groaned like a ship's hull breaking apart. A massive, sustained roar rolled through the earth, a sound of such immense scale and power that it defied description. It was the sound of a world being unmade, of geological time being compressed into a single, horrifying moment. It went on for nearly a minute, a continuous avalanche of sound and fury that seemed to signal the end of all things. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was not tense. It was the calm, settled quiet of a graveyard. On Thorne's screen, the seismic data flatlined. The enemy's acoustic signals, their network, their very presence in the stone, had been erased. The cavern system on the northern ridge, once a bustling staging ground, was now a solid, compressed mass of limestone and travertine. She had not just blocked their advance. She had not just sealed their fortress. She had removed it and them from existence. The threat was neutralized. The siege was broken. In the profound stillness of the command center, the only sound was the quiet, steady hum of the emergency lights. The crew stood frozen, their faces pale, trying to comprehend the sheer, unbelievable magnitude of what had just occurred. They had been saved not by bullets or bombs, but by a ghost in the machine and a whisper to the stone. It was in this moment of stunned silence that a new sound emerged, a single, clear chime from a small, overlooked communications panel. A high-priority, encrypted channel, one that connected directly to strategic command, had somehow restored itself. A green light blinked steadily, insistently. No one moved. They stared at it as if it were a supernatural omen. After a moment, Thorne walked over and activated the speaker. A voice, calm and impossibly clear, filled the room. It was a voice accustomed to wielding immense power with quiet confidence. "This is General Madsen at Stratcom. Terminus, do you read me? Acknowledge. We registered a seismic event in your sector of an unprecedented scale. Report your situation. Over." The remaining crew looked at Major Vance, their former commander. He sat staring into nothing, his mind clearly shattered by the night's events. He was incapable of speech, incapable of command. Sergeant Diaz, a look of grim determination on his face, took a step toward the panel, ready to take responsibility. But Thorne held up a hand, stopping him. She keyed the transmitter. "General Madsen, this is Forward Operating Base Terminus," she said, her voice as even and measured as ever. "The command network is down, but the facility is secure. The external threat has been neutralized. We have sustained minimal casualties post-intervention." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The general's voice, when it returned, was tinged with a new, cautious curiosity. "Terminus, identify yourself. Who is speaking?" "Dr. Eris Thorne, General." Another pause, this one longer, heavier. The air in the bunker was thick with unspoken questions. The name clearly meant something to the general. something far beyond civilian geologist. Thorn? The general repeated, the name now a quiet statement of disbelief. Codename Ghost? My briefing stated you were on site for a passive geological survey only. I was not aware your operational status had been activated. What happened out there, Doctor? The revelation hung in the air, electric and transformative. Ghost. The name rippled through the gathered technicians and soldiers. It was a legend, a whispered rumor in the intelligence community about a shadowy figure in a classified strategic unit known only as the Environmental Warfare Group. A unit that didn't fight armies, but ecosystems. A specialist who could weaponize a hurricane, trigger a tsunami, or, apparently, collapse a mountain. Major Vance's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The quiet, soft civilian he had belittled and threatened was a Tier 1 strategic asset, a weapon of last resort. Thorne's report was concise, clinical, and utterly damning. She detailed the enemy's use of acoustic resonance, her detection of their network, her warnings to Major Vance, and his explicit refusal to heed them. She described his disastrous tactical decisions and the resulting loss of patrols Bravo and Charlie. She concluded with a factual account of her own intervention, a simple statement of cause and effect. She did not editorialize. She did not place blame. She simply presented the data, allowing the facts to form an unassailable verdict. When she finished, the silence from Stratcom was glacial. General Madsen was a man known for his composure, but the fury in his voice when he finally spoke was a cold, controlled inferno. Major Corbin Vance, the general said, his voice like the chipping of ice. Are you there, Major? Vance stumbled to the comms panel, his face ashen. Yes, General. Sir, he stammered. Major, you were given a direct, classified order prior to this deployment. You were instructed that the civilian analyst, Dr. Thorne, was to be given your full, unconditional cooperation. You were told that her requests were to be treated as direct orders from my office. Did you not receive that briefing? Sir, the situation was, I thought. Vance's words dissolved into incoherent mumbling. There was no defense. There were no excuses. You thought, the general cut him off, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You thought your rank gave you the right to be catastrophically ignorant. You mistook arrogance for leadership, and your men paid for it with their lives. Major Vance, you are hereby relieved of command, effective immediately. You are to be confined to your quarters under guard. You will speak to no one. You will touch nothing. A transport will be there within the hour to escort you to a full court-martial. Your career in the United States Marine Corps is over. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Vance whispered, his voice the sound of a man utterly broken. He turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and shuffled toward the exit. No longer a commander, but a prisoner. The man who had entered the room like a storm left it as a ghost. The general's voice returned to the speaker, its warmth and respect a stark contrast to the ice of a moment before. Sergeant Diaz, you are in temporary command of FOB Terminus until Colonel Bishop's relief force arrives at 0600. Your primary duty is to give Dr. Thorne anything and everything she requires to ensure the continued security of that facility. Is that crystal clear, Sergeant? Diaz, standing straighter than he ever had in his life, moved to the panel. Yes, General. Crystal. Good. Dr. Thorne, Madsen said, his tone now one of peer-to-peer respect. Ghost, it's good to have you back. Get your work done. We'll debrief when you're stateside. the channel clicked shut, leaving behind a new and profound silence. The oppressive, fear-laced atmosphere of the bunker had been scrubbed clean. In its place was a quiet, focused efficiency. The power of personality had been replaced by the power of competence. The remaining crew moved with a renewed sense of purpose, following the quiet, infrequent suggestions from Thorne as if they were divine commandments. They cleared debris, triaged the wounded, and worked to restore essential systems, all under the calm, watchful eye of the woman they now understood to be their savior. She was no longer just the geologist. She was Ghost, a figure of legend made real, and they treated her with a reverence bordering on fear. Later, as the first hints of dawn began to soften the razor-sharp edges of the mountain peaks, Sergeant Diaz approached her. He held out 2 items, a steaming mug of black coffee and a tactical data pad. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hesitant but firm. "I've started mapping the secondary fissure lines you mentioned before all this. I was wondering if you could show me what you saw in the data. I want to understand." It was the ultimate gesture of respect. He did not offer empty praise or fawning gratitude. He asked to learn. He acknowledged her mastery and sought to comprehend a fraction of it. Thorne looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than pure analysis crossed her features. A faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval. She took the mug, the warmth a welcome anchor in the cold aftermath. "Of course, Sergeant," she said, her voice softening slightly. She took the data pad and began to explain, her fingers tracing the complex dance of pressure and resonance, translating the arcane language of the stone into terms a soldier could understand. It was in this quiet moment of shared knowledge, of a student and a master, that the true cultural shift of FOB Terminus was cemented. The age of the loud man was over. The time of the quiet professional had begun. 3 days later, Colonel Bishop and his reinforcements had fully secured the base. A new, more permanent order had been established. And Eris Thorne was gone. She departed as she had arrived, with no fanfare and no ceremony. One morning, her workstation was simply empty, the screens dark. The only evidence she had ever been there was a neatly cleaned coffee mug placed upside down on a coaster and a single note left for Diaz. It contained only 2 words: "Good coffee." Her departure left a vacuum, a space filled only by the legend she had created. The story of the geologist who spoke to the mountain would be told for years at Terminus and beyond. A cautionary tale for arrogant commanders and an inspiration for those who valued substance over style. They learned that true strength was not in the volume of a command, but in the depth of one's understanding. They learned that the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal is not the one that makes the most noise, but the one that comprehends the silent, immutable laws that govern the foundation of the world itself, and has the courage to act upon that knowledge, alone and unseen. She was a ghost, a whisper in the stone, a permanent, unsettling echo in the memory of the mountain.